Okay, so today, thanks to Jackie, is the first day of spring. It's 20th day. I'm Carol Weinshell, President of Program and Membership at Congregation Rodeph Sholom in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I tell you who I am all the time because this is being recorded, and when somebody is looking at it, we want them to know what it's all about and where we are. So I know you all know who I am. I hope you don't get tired of hearing that. I'm going to ask you to stay muted until there's time for question and answer because the background noise is distracting. And as I say that, I will get rid of my landline. So this morning, because that's apt to ring, this morning, we're going to tie together our, I guess you'd call it, mini series on immigration and refugees. It's somehow or other, this all fit together. While we were planning it, we thought we were going to be good, but we didn't know exactly where this was going to take us. We started with Gracie Oxenberg, who told us her story about Sudan and coming to the United States and where her family was. We then moved on across the big blue pond to the Lower East Side of New York, where our own Rabbi Praver told us about the Jews on the Lower East Side and highlighted his grandmother's synagogue. We're looking forward to someday taking a trip and seeing that synagogue literally in person. We had talked a little bit, Rabbi Praver and I, about the Jews who were forced into exile from the Middle East and North African Jewish communities in the second half of the 20th century. There's a very good video on this. We're going to show you a short clip. The video itself is 40 minutes, so we're not going to do that. We're going to spend about 7 minutes on it. So we're talking about refugees. The ironic situation about refugees is what's happening in Ukraine. And Rabbi Praver and I talked about this on Shabbat at the Kiddush yesterday. When we started planning this, at no time, there was no hint in our minds that we were going to be talking about the situation that's happening today to tie together refugees. So with that said, knowing that it wasn't the initial plan, parts of that, I am sure, will come in today. So I'm going to turn the program over to Rabbi Praver, and we're going to kind of tag team as we go. When he's ready for me to show you the video and the pictures, he's going to let me know. So with that said, Rabbi Praver, it's all you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm reminded of a joke. I don't remember where I saw it. It was in a movie, I think in Ireland, and during the conflict there, and a leader in a town meeting got up and said, "Every time I snap my fingers, a child in an Irish child dies of starvation." And then someone in the audience said, "Well, stop snapping your fingers." And that's what it felt like in preparing for this, because I spoke the first time about my concern about anti-Semitism, and then we had that hostage taking out in Texas, and then we spoke about the refugees and the immigrants to America, and then the Ukrainian war started. Maybe I shouldn't say anything more. So, but all kidding aside, this is a a very important subject, highly neglected. It will challenge us all to stretch our orientation as mostly, I believe, Jews from, Ashkenazic background. We do have some from Mizrahi and Sephardic, but this will be a learning edge for all of us, I believe. And this is the forgotten refugees. And it's called the forgotten refugees because they, in many ways, were never really accorded the same sort of attention in the media, attention in literature. There's very little written about it. Now there's more, but it's an increasing field. And this is basically the Jewish exodus from Arab and Muslim countries. Their flight, their expulsion, their evacuation, their migration, and certainly there's differences in numbers, estimates, but certainly it's more than 800,000, and some say as much as 1 million, depending on how you count. And so these are primarily Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews from Arab countries, and the Muslim world, meaning also Iran, from the Persian world as well. And this took place in the Iranian thing, 1979 to the 80s, as a consequence of the Iranian Revolution. I put an emphasis on that because they all came to my hometown, well, not all, but about half, came to Great Neck, Long Island. And I saw I lived through that whole thing, and that whole sociological change of Great Neck into a town that had a very strong and wealthy Iranian presence. Now, a number of small-scale Jewish immigrations began in the Middle Eastern countries in the early 20th century, with the only substantial aliyah coming from Yemen and Syria. And so, in other words, in Mandatory Palestine, very few came. They only came after the establishment of the state in great numbers. And this is a vast subject that we need to explore more to understand the reason why they were all coming at that time. Certainly was Zionism. It was also, people often don't realize the anti-Semitism that had penetrated the Arabic world through Islam at that time. And we often always think of it as something that was only European, but there was actually a plan for the Jews, had Hitler succeeded, for the Jews in these Arab countries as well. But we have to resist the temptation to kind of have a monolithic view of the whole thing, because each of the states, the Arabic states and Iran, had their own peculiar history. But as a general takeaway, there were a lot of Jews that left and basically emptied out these lands. We must understand that the Iraqi Jews, Baghdad and the surrounding areas, are the remnant of the Jews that never came to build the second temple. That would be the Babylonian Talmud, the Babylonian Jewry that remained there, supported Israel, and lived there for over 2,000 years. So we have to understand that Jews lived in these Arab countries as Jews before a Muslim ever walked foot in the land, because Islam came so much later. And there's something called dhimmi, raise your hand if that's a new word for you. Dhimmi. Okay. Dhimmi is a protected class. People of the book would be a Christian or a Jew. And this was a better situation for Jews that were in Spain, of course, in the years of the Inquisition, in the 250 some odd years of the Inquisition. So this was a safer place to live, but you were still dhimmi, which means a tolerated and protected minority. And depending again on the country, in the most extreme form, it would come out as you can't ride on a donkey if you're walking on a sidewalk and a Muslim is coming, you're in the other direction, the Jew will walk off the sidewalk to yield to the Muslim. You're still safe and protected, but you must understand your place. And this was, the way of Islam, and Jews, as we know, thrived even in situations like that. And then there's called the tribute tax every year. They must pay a tax. The Jews must pay a tax called the Gezia tax. To be tolerated, I guess a Muslim would be explaining it differently. They would say, well, you don't have to serve in the army. You're not really trusted to serve in the army. So you're relieved of all those duties. So you have a tax. Again, there's going to be different ways of explaining this. Muslims will tend to say, well, the Jews left because they wanted to pursue Zionism. They wanted to pursue their dream to live in Zion. They were drawn by it, not because of persecution. And that would be more of a Islamic way of explaining it. But of course, the truth is always multifaceted. And by seeing some of these things, particularly this little clip, hopefully it will whet your appetite and open your curiosity to learn more. So the big countries that we're speaking about, we're talking about Syria, Egypt, Yemen, Morocco, Turkey, Libya, Lebanon, and you're going to hear about the different influences, the French influence, the Italian influence in different countries. And you'll see, because that the colonization, the French colonization and the Italian colonization brought equality to Jews. So Jews, of course, like that. But this was against the interests of the Muslim, right? The colonizing force. So it was good for the Jews, not good for the Muslims. And therefore, you could see how the Jews could be blamed for befriending the liberating forces. It's just the dynamic of the situation. And I said Tunisia, I think. So let's roll that now, and we'll see where that takes us. We'll roll the clip. I don't hear volume yet. No volume yet, Carol. And anybody that can't hear it well enough, please raise your hand so Carol knows to raise the volume.
Okay, let's try this. Can you hear it now?
I do.
If somebody wants to understand what is going on in the Middle East, they have to understand the Jewish refugees from Arab countries.
Buried beneath the headlines of the Mideast conflict is the forgotten story of the region's indigenous Jewish communities.
Let's try again.
In 1945, up to 1 million Jews lived in the Middle East outside of the
Okay?
Palestine Mandate. Within a few years, only a few thousand remained.
Can you enlarge the picture?
The ancient Jewish quarters
Maybe.
of Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad,
Top right, the
vibrant
box.
bustling centers. Today, they are
Kind of
silent.
afraid to do it.
That's better. That's a little better.
Okay.
And then, so let's start from the beginning and a little louder. Just a little louder.
In
Thank you.
refugee, and who today carry the memory of a destroyed civilization.
Thank you.
In the 1930s, a tide of Arab nationalism swept the countries of the Middle East as they emerged from colonial rule. Strident Arab nationalist leaders often made Jews a scapegoat for social discontent.
There was a pattern of Arab government, state-sanctioned, indeed state-orchestrated repression, which included intimidation, harassment, beatings, persecution, and even murder.
In Iraq, in the 1930s, you had the pro-Nazi government, which led to the Farhud in 1941, in which Jews were completely massacred. What happened was that the mobs went rioting through the Jewish ghetto. They would pull babies apart from their limbs till they broke. They would rape women and daughters in front of the families.
They pulled the Jew among all passengers in the bus. Who is the Jew? And they did the Jew out. They killed them outside the bus.
It really created a tremendous fear in the Jewish population, especially for my own parents. My mother had to run through rooftops to escape the mob that was out to kill many of the Jews in her neighborhood.
כן, אני הייתי בת 13 באותו זמן, בזמן המוראות, וראיתי את הזוועה הזאת, ועד היום, מול העיניים שלי. הערבים קמו והורגים, שורפים והורגים, והתחילו לפרוץ בתים, להרוג, לשבור, להושיב. ואנחנו פחדנו מאוד.
We're talking about Nuremberg-type laws which criminalized being a Jew and characterized Jews as enemies of the state, which stripped Jews of their citizenship, which sequestered or forcibly seized their property and assets.
There are no Jews left in Libya today. The Darvishi synagogue in Tripoli once overflowed with congregants on the Sabbath and on holidays. Today, it is abandoned and vandalized. Only a few dozen Jews remain in Iraq, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon. Outside Beirut, the Hamdoun synagogue sits empty. In Morocco, the El Husseini synagogue in the old Jewish quarter of Fez is now a boxing club. After Jews fled Iraqi Kurdistan in 1955, this synagogue was turned into a mosque. A dirt road was built over this old Jewish cemetery, with foot traffic exposing Jewish graves. Vibrant Middle Eastern communities that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands are no more. All told, nearly 1 million Jews have fled Arab countries and Iran, and hundreds of Jewish communities have been ethnically cleansed.
Behind every intimidation, behind every silencing, behind every persecution, behind every beating or murder of Jews from Arab lands, behind every property sequestered, behind every assets seized, behind every bank account blocked, we're talking about the historiography of an entire community.
If I say, who are the Middle East refugees, people don't think at all about the Jews. All the people think about are the Palestinians.
Many people ask me, why do you call yourself forgotten refugees? It is interesting to note that in the history of the Middle East, we have been totally cut out of the picture
The United Nations General Assembly since 1947 has adopted 687 resolutions on the Arab-Israeli conflict. 101 of those resolutions dealt with refugees, but all those 101 resolutions dealt with Palestinian refugees only. It's astonishing to realize that not one resolution, not one of these resolutions ever dealt with the issue of Jewish refugees from Arab lands.
We want our children to remember us, so that we can perpetuate the memory of all these 1 million Jews who were kicked out of the Arab world, and who will never return بدون رجوع.
The Arab governments have taken away our homes. They've taken away our culture. They have destroyed our communities, but they can never take away our spirit to fight for justice.
What's important to me is that the stories of everybody be told, and that everybody's history be recognized and everybody's rights be honored.
Okay, so that's a very, just a short little clip of the whole documentary. But, you know, enough to introduce the big idea here, which is that there are 100,000 Jews from Arab lands and Muslim lands that comprise the majority, certainly at one point in time, of the Israeli population, about 51% in the early 50s. And the face of Israel, you will see those same faces from these countries, the olive skin people. So herein lies several things. We could talk about it in terms of Israel-Palestine, but let's put that on the side because that's kind of an old story already. It's important to realize, I'll give you a little anecdote. I lived in Israel for 10 years. So right around the time of Pesach, when you go into the makolet to buy food and get ready, the foods that have rice or corn or kitnius that Ashkenazim don't eat will be in the back underneath some kind of a tarp in your makolet in Jerusalem. You will have to understand that that's a punch in the nose to someone of Mizrahi Sephardic background. We have to understand how it looks and feels to them. And so we do have racial, ethnic challenges in Israel. It's an immigrant country, right? And this is a big one right there. Today we have Ethiopian, which is a whole, and Russian, Ukrainian, but even before those, there's always this issue. It gets better over time. The more intermarriage, the more that people socialize and understand each other's ways. Progress is made slowly. But you know, people of a different background, of non-Ashkenazic, will often refer, maybe only amongst themselves, as the Ashkenazic Jewish world. They will say that everything that seems Jewish is always in an Ashkenazic image. And so what they would want when they walk into that makolet is for all the food to be available. And if you're an Ashkenazi and you don't eat rice, so don't buy it. But to call it like treif, you know, that the right, my rights end when they start to trample on your rights. That's where my rights end. And, socially, that's where the resentments are felt. So that's one thing. We also have to understand the idea of what is Arab. Arab, is not Muslim. It's Arab is a culture. And in a very, very simple way, I'm sorry if I make it very simple, but I think it's important to make sure that this piece is in place. I'm an American, so I know everything about, the American culture. I rooted for, the Mets because that's where the train went from Long Island to Queens, not to the Bronx. So that's why I'm not a Yankee fan. I know New York and I know English as well as a Christian American. Yeah. And I know the culture and the movies and everything. We must understand that that's exactly the same for a Jew in living in an Arabic land, that they know the culture, the food, the actors, the cinema, everything, no less than the Muslims, and they're Jews. So we must understand that Sephardic and Mizrahi, or let's say Mizrahi Jews from Arab lands are Arabs. And they are Arabs that happen to be Jews. And their culture is different. And their halacha is different. When you look in the Shulchan Aruch, the first opinion is the Mechaber. And then that's the Sephardic magistrate. So the Sephardic world was, once the most powerful in the Talmudic and scholarly world, or the Babylonian world, the Cairo, Geniza of Cairo, everything was there. And then over the years, the center of that activity was sort of relocated into Eastern Europe and different parts of Europe. But that's one thing. Also, we must remember that the Zionist movement is an Ashkenazic movement. So Zionism was weak in the amongst the Arab Jews, the Mizrahi Jews. So it wasn't as strong. We must also understand that as much as Jews were dhimmi in second class, as Jews always do, they excelled in business and often rose by their merits to the top of the society in wealth and influence and culture. Some of the greatest singers in Egypt was a Jewish woman. I can't think of her name right now, revered by everyone. And that's how we tend to do it. We start out with a disadvantage, but then we tend to win over hearts and souls by our tremendous contributions in every field. And then we rise up and we're given because we're needed. So that means there was also a lot of wealth in amongst the Jews. And it's important to know that wealth was stripped from them. That was, if they wanted to go to Israel, they had to basically give up all of their wealth. You have to wrap your head around that. So these very prestigious people, presidents, maybe even advisors in the government, now are living on the sandy beach in Tel Aviv in refugee tents with nothing except the shirt on their back. Now, of course, it's not a competition. It's not a pity competition. But like when we think about our commemoration of the Holocaust, as it should be commemorated, sometimes it doesn't come to our mind the great loss that was experienced by this Jewish group, by Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews. And I can't really point to anything unless I'm wrong, but if anybody knows otherwise, some kind of officially sanctioned commemoration of this event in Israeli society or Jewish society. So we are part of the cultural wave that somehow allows this to be forgotten. And so it's something, hopefully, that this presentation will perk your curiosity, your interest, to just say, hey, why does it always, just because it was always done that way, does it necessarily mean it should always be done that way? Maybe there should be something that is done. Of course, it must come from the people themselves, right? But maybe the support and just the awareness of the events might create, by the Ashkenazic and the other Jewish people, if we understand this phenomenon, this non-recognition of their expulsion and their refugee statuses, maybe that would be creating a fertile ground where if something came from the Sephardic and Mizrahi communities, that we could welcome it in our as an important change and an important recognition of what happened to their community. There's a lot of things like this we need to be aware, like, the Jews, even in Greece, this is not even going so much in the Sephardic world, but how often do we think about Holocaust victims from Greece? Don't we usually think, about Poland and Romania and Galicia, right? Hungary and different places, right? But almost every single Jew from Greece died in the Holocaust. Almost every Jew. There's only a few Greek Jews left. But I didn't really hear it. It was like a new thing when I learned that, because I met a Greek Jew. So it just comes down to the testimony of a few people, and who is going to remember things properly. So that's in the Jewish world itself. And then, of course, there's the Palestinian, how everything is about the Palestinian refugee, and the UN. And I think the Palestinian refugees were about 400,000. And it's not to say that, we were angels and everything was perfect, but the idea of refugees is a phenomenon that happens throughout history. We saw it with the Syrian refugees. They had to go somewhere. And so it might be a high time to stop, blaming ourselves, on the left side, I would say, for going to Israel. Like, where were these Jews, Arabic speaking, Hebrew reading, and speaking Hebrew to a certain extent? Where were they really to go? And where did they go? They went to, in large measure, to Israel. They went to France, and they came to America. And that's where they went. And every single country has its own story. Okay. And you saw this incredible guy, Erwin Coulter, speaking and using the Nuremberg-like laws that were in practice at this time. So it's important to get a grasp on what exactly happened. And this would be, after the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948, and the 48, 49, 50, 51. In this period, this is where the great influx came into Israel and the United States and France. This is when it happened. So let me pause for a moment and see where you guys are at, how you're feeling, what are you thinking at this point in time. I'm going to mute myself.
I have a lot to say, but I think I'm going to have probably my own hour at some point. I'm currently doing research on very specific Arab Jews in very specific period. It's going to be the Jews of Tunis, Tunisia, the capital of Tunisia, during World War II. And really I'll focus on 6 months during World War II. So it's going to be a very, very focused master project in history. But it's got to be focused because I'm not going to write a book. I'm going to write what will be equivalent to a chapter within a book. And then once I've done that, and Emir Hashem, I have to be done actually this summer with the first draft, I will be able to make a presentation, but again, will be very focused. I already did quite a bit of research. I bought some books, read articles, and I went to Machon Yad Ben Tzvi in Jerusalem last summer and got as much material as they have, which, believe me, it's not a lot of material considering how much there is on the Holocaust and on the Jews of Hungary and Poland and England and France and all of those other things. There is much less research, much less material, although it's still being gathered today, sometimes by the children of those, like I'm the child of a Tunisian mom who was there during the war, but there are fewer and fewer of them. So anyway, I just wanted to add that as a comment. Regarding the absorption of the Sfaradim and Ashkenazim in Israel, of course, my parents got married in the 1940s, late 1940s, and they were, my father was from Eastern Europe and my mother from North Africa. It was very rare to have those kind of marriages at the time. Obviously, they were all new immigrants and it was very unusual. But today, the intermarriage between Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, Mizrahim, okay, that kind of marriage is very, very common, which means that they're all Israelis. The second and now third generation are part of the Israeli culture, and while they some of them still maintain some remnants of a language, food, culture, music from their ancestors, which will be the grandparents. They marry each other, and that's a sign. When people marry, it's a sign that they're really integrated into a single society. And we know, for example in this country, right? We know that there is a Chinatown in some cities, and the Chinese only marry each other, and they can be second or third generation Chinese, right? And if they go to college and start marrying American boys and girls, then you know that they are fully integrated into society. But it takes a few generations. So in Israel, it started already in the second generation to marry each other. So I want to point that because it's an important thing. It shows the integration and the sense of being one people in the land of Israel. And marrying each other is a big part of that.
Well, I really look forward to learning more about your research. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I didn't know about your project there. So please, I love to hear when you're ready to present.
That's exciting because we're going to put you on the calendar and you'll be the first person, the first program I'm getting ready for next year. So how exciting is that? Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Others?
Can you talk a little more about the Dimi law? I'm not sure if you said enough. I know that it's a law that create protected class, Jews and Christians, but also discriminates against them. It's probably something I need more as a background for my paper as well.
I could point you to some wonderful books and articles written about Dimi. So when the tax is paid, there was a very humiliating ceremony that takes place where the representative has to present the money from the Jewish community to the Sultan or whoever the political leader is. and he's actually slapped across the face in this ritual. You could see it. I'm not making it up. Until he's treated in such a way until he feels subjugated under the yoke of Islam, under the authority of Islam. But to remind you, remember, that you're dhimmi, and this is your, the payment for the protection under the Islamic covenant, which was a much better deal than Spain and Portugal in the 15th and 16th centuries. But it is what it is, and so the status of Jews is all based on merit. There's no it's like trying to run a race where you start far beyond behind other people that are Muslim, and then you only could catch up or even exceed through tremendous contribution and merit. And that is a theme that seems to run throughout the entire Jewish history. Even the way that Israel operates today, the peace is achieved because we become so needed. Countries need water, they need our medical advances, they need technology, and they want it. And these whole Abraham Accords seem to be more in that kind of a model, where we just become too useful, and then so they put down their swords and make peace, because on the scale, it's better to have these goodies than to be at war. Now, the total number of Palestinian refugees, I think, is about 400,000. So all of the big deal about the Palestinian, right? And we never even heard about 800,000 Jews that had the same experience. And the difference, without sounding maybe a little, and maybe I do sound a little chauvinistic, but whatever, is that sort of self-determinism of a Jew, and that they don't take any kind of pride in maintaining the refugee status, and they want to move from that and normalize again and reestablish. I've seen this with Jews from Cuba, in Florida, have everything stolen from them, in the revolution, right? And then come to start from scratch, and then become wildly successful in Miami, and not whining or complaining, but just starting again. And with the Palestinian thing, with the UNRWA, it just is kept alive and alive and alive, with some kind of expectation that somehow the Jews are going to disappear. And it's not reality. And the condition of refugees moving to different places throughout the world is a fact that is not particular to Jews. It's just a fact of human civilizations, that neighborhoods change, people move around because of political changes, and the influx of Jews to Israel is so logical, so matim, Israel, Jew, they kind of go together. So that's sort of how this weighs into that. And I, like the young woman said, I think all of the narratives need to be heard. I agree with her, the young woman in the clip. And that has become my litmus test as I go into interfaith dialogue with, even locally throughout the state, with the Islamic and Arab communities. And basically I say, I'll listen to yours if you listen to mine. And if someone doesn't want to hear or is unwilling to hear this story, this little clip, and only want me to hear the Palestine, which I'm willing to hear. I'm willing to see where, social injustice, bring it on. Let's have a look at it. Benny Morris, Benny Morris. Let's have a look at things. We're secure enough to be able to see, where we may have gone overboard or done things that were not completely right. Let's have a look. But if it's only me looking at the sins of my people, but the other side not willing to look at the sins of, the Arab people, or say, what do they have to do with one another, and then refuse on that basis, then that's my litmus test. And then I usually don't push any further in dialogue, because that just means that my story won't be told either. So I went through that. I'll just end with this. I went through that. I after the shooting, I was invited by a lot of Islamic groups, and I was kind of the darling for a while in coming and speaking and being empathetic. Certainly, I could be empathetic if the family has a father that went to visit Syria and can't come back to the family in Connecticut. Sure, I could hear that story. I could know that there's something wrong with that, and that family should have the father back in the home. But then when there were I ran for U.S. Congress in the 5th District, didn't get very far, but in the process I met what's her name now? From Detroit, Omar, I'm drawing a blank. She's like the trio in the Congress.
Rabbi, it's either Omar or Talib.
Yeah, Omar Talib, thank you.
No, Omar is one. Congresswoman Omar is one.
Yeah.
And the other one is Congresswoman
Talib,
Talib.
yeah.
I get mixed up which districts they represent.
Right. So I met these young women when I ran, and I had a very ominous sort of feeling of doom, actually, when I met them. I can't explain why. I was hoping that it would be like a new voice in the Islamic world, a young voice about Israel's here to stay, Palestinians need rights. Let's put it together. Let's move forward. Let's do business. Let's thrive together. Yeah. I thought it was going to be kind of like I was hoping for that. And these were progressive leaders. And so what wound up happening was that it was very regressive and going backwards and digging up the hate. And so right around that time, there was the representative of CARE organization. And I knew him for years because he had invited me to all these different outings. And then on social media, I guess he got a little intoxicated with the victory of these two women. And he said that he expressed the view that Israel should be dissolved. And the whole time he said that, the two-state solution. But I learned that was just sort of the entry ticket, to be accepted by me and to have a conversation. But as soon as that, the tide turned a little bit, he got a little bit elated. He made that statement. I asked him about it again, and he said he was appalled by the question. I said, what do you mean? The question was, doesn't Israel have a right to exist? And his response was that he was appalled by the question. Why are you appalled by the question? He said, it would be, wouldn't you be appalled by Hitler? And then I was like, okay, all right. And so at that point, I made it an ideological and political shift because I saw it that I was a useful idiot at those years. I was just being used as a useful idiot. So now I've come to the position that this clip is very important. And it's very important to preserve our history while, we are hearing the history and the narrative of other people. And this is my litmus test. I feel very passionate about it. That if an Arab will listen to this story, I'll listen to, their story. And let's see how we can maybe reconcile and bring things to a better place.
I'm sorry, but I do have to leave right now. I have someplace to be at 11 o'clock, but I do appreciate what you told us. And I do have some stories to relate also about my early youth when I grew up in Borough Park, and we were a mixed neighborhood between Ashkenazi Jews and Jews from the Eastern world, Morocco, Tunisia, places like that. And I had some very close friends I grew up with, including the Praver family, who lived there as well.
Say a little louder.
I said, when I was a young child, I grew up in a mixed neighborhood of Jewish people from Ashkenazi background and also from the Eastern background, the African background. And the Praver family, the Praver family was from that very neighborhood. My older brother went to school with one of his brothers. So they had this kind of mixed neighborhood. I got familiar with them. They had huge families. They would have 12, 13 children. Ashkenazis had, maybe 3 or 4. So they were different in that way, but it was a very interesting, period of my life growing up there. I really got very close with some of these people. They were wonderful people. Sorry, I have to leave now, but I have to be somewhere. But thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you,
Sai.
Yes.
Oh, Sai, I'm holding you to that story.
Well, I know you are, and I got to finish my taxes first.
Okay.
Sorry, I was so
Rabbi.
long-winded. I want to hear your story and go file your taxes, and we'll talk again soon.
Rabbi, I have a question. By the way, on the issue of care, I will have a conversation with you because I have some information that you would find interesting about that also, but we'll do that off camera. My question is that obviously you're kind of preaching to the choir here. Many of us know about the forgotten refugees and of course care about them. I think there's a good portion of American Jews, though, that don't know about it and have not been exposed to it. And I'm thinking that's particularly true among young Jews, because on the college campuses, they're getting shoved in their face every day about the Palestinian refugees, but I'm sure they hear nothing about this. So my question is kind of digging down into this. Why do you suppose that this is the untold story? Why are these the forgotten refugees? The mainstream media doesn't cover it at all, the corporate media. They don't do that. Is it merely that? Is it also that the since the Israelis in tent cities, et cetera, is it that the UN is just, anti-Semitic? So this is what do you think the main reason is that there's a combination of all these? What's the main reason that this has been forgotten?
Well, I'm no expert, but I think a lot of it has to do with power, though, and from the UN and the political power is with all of these, the Arab League and all these Arab countries, that they want a certain story told and they don't want another story told. So that's as simple as that. And then in our own world, in the Ashkenazi world, that's something that we're responsible for, to educate ourselves, become more aware. We have unconscious bias, sometimes conscious bias, that we need to address. We need to make space for different Jews. If we're going to be saying everything that we say when we defend Israel, we say, it's not just white colonists. Go to Israel and you'll see, Jews from all over the world in different colors and everything like that. And that's all true. And so we have to live up to that. We have to we have to listen to our own sermon and kind of expand our concept of Am Yisrael. What is Am Yisrael? And it's not just, Ashkenazi. It's all of these different Jews from the world.
Right. And to that point,
the Zionist power also being a European thing.
Yeah.
That power not being with the Sephardic, so we tend to favor and notice more of our own kind.
Yeah. To that point, I have a quick follow-up question. Is I have family down in Great Neck. We'll have a conversation about that also. But Great Neck, since it has such a large, Iranian Jewish community and wealthy and everything, and of course in Brooklyn, there's the Syrian. I had a very good friend when I lived in New York from the Syrian Jewish community. My question is, do those communities, do they tell this story out loud to their communities to get it out there to the greater Jewish community?
I could just say the way it hits me. I think that there's a sniut, maybe Nima, you'll help me. It's kind of a modesty.
Humility, maybe? Humility?
Yeah, there's a humility and a modesty. Not, this is my story, amongst Sephardim. They tend to be very classy in that way. I mean, they have that quality, and they might not, really subscribe to the idea of tooting their horn as much as that might be culturally normative for us. I don't know. It's just out of my head. I feel it. Nima, what do you think?
Yeah, I just want to say something about the difference between refugee and Jew making Aliyah. Don't forget that well before World War II, and certainly afterward, there were many waves of Aliyah to Israel. Aliyah means immigration. So the question is, when somebody from a DP camp in Europe go to Israel, is he a refugee or is he a Jew making Aliyah because he doesn't want to live in Europe anymore because he hates what happened to his family? He or she, right? The same thing, it can be perceived that the Jews in North Africa were no longer comfortable being dhimmis and discriminated and decided to have a better life in Israel in the 1952, 53, when the big waves of Aliyah came from those countries. So where do you distinguish between an immigrant who wants to make a better life in a new place versus a refugee who is being pushed out from their country because of war, because of famine, because of discrimination, different things. So the Jews of North Africa, they made Aliyah, but they were also pushed out. So it was a combination of the two. But part of their humility and maybe personal pride said, okay, we were pushed out. We could not take a lot more than one luggage. They left with very little. Even the wealthy ones couldn't take a whole lot. But we wanted to start a new life, and we wanted to say that we were Zionist, even though there were not really much of a Zionist to begin with, and that we made Aliyah, and we're starting a new life. Years later, when it became a question of narrative, they say, oh, we have 500,000 Jews from Arab countries and 500 Arabs from Palestine. Why don't we say that the two of them are refugees who just kind of change places and cancel each other's narrative by doing that? It's an interesting thing, but it doesn't work like that, right? In political terms. So yeah, to some extent, I would say that my family, they felt discriminated in Tunis, but they also felt that they were proud Zionists, and they made Aliyah in 1952. My mother went in 48, and she got married, and then her parents came about 4 or 5 years later, when life in North Africa became insufferable for Jews.
So thank you, Nima. Before we end, and we're getting really tight, I think Gracie had a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Nima's point. I myself never considered myself a refugee when we first came to this country. We were always immigrants. Yes, when we came, we weren't exactly pushed out, but we could see the writing on the wall and decided to come here, not to Israel, again, because we already knew the language and whatever. But never until today, when I saw this thing, I've never considered myself a refugee. It was always, as Nima said, an immigrant. So where do you draw the line? You know, perhaps that's why, Larry, it's gotten lost, because those people who did come considered themselves coming to get a better life than we had in the Arab countries. And that's why it was kept quiet.
So Rabbi Praver, it sounds to me like this topic and this conversation has a lot more to it than the hour that we have allotted. And to follow up question time, if you're willing to do that. You're muted.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's contribution to our meeting today. I enjoyed going through this. Hopefully it will just whet your appetite. There's so much to learn. So it's not just one experience, you know, experience in Iraq could be very different, you know, than other countries. So to get a unified voice of what the narrative is about, for some, it might be, you know, horrible anti-Semitism, and for others, it might be just like Gracie, like seeing the writing on the wall and opting for a better life, which in the literature they, you know, call it like a pull, being drawn, pulled towards something rather than pushed. So there's that. Do we have time just to roll the pictures and we'll go out on that?
I think we can do that.
Okay. Just have a few pictures. You've probably seen some of these pictures. Okay. This is Morocco.
I'm getting there. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, yeah, that's a Morocco picture. You could just roll them. That's a very old, happy lady. This is Yemen. This is the groom. This is the bride, the Yemenite bride. This, I'm not exactly sure where. I think Baghdad.
I think it is.
Yeah. This is Morocco. I'm not sure. This might be Libya. Back to Yemen. 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 The refugee camps, it looks Yemen to me. Egyptian belly dancers, they're Jewish. And that's it.
Okay.
And I sent some links, which will make sure that you all get with some additional articles. Yeah, those are them. So if you could, Carol, if you could forward them.
I will do that because I know who's on.
Right.
I will do it later today.
So thank you all very much.
Debbie, did you have a comment? Deb? Oh.
I was just writing in the chat. Thank you. It was a great program. Thank you. That's all.
Okay.
I was just writing that in the chat. I don't know that it got through. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Enjoy the first day of spring.
Okay.
And,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll
Very
see
good
you.
Thank you.
We'll see you again.
very
The
much.
27th, the 30th. We've got a lot on our calendar. So a lot of heavy and fun and learning and sharing. So I look forward to seeing all of you then.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Your day.
Thank you. Have a
You
nice
too.
day.
Happy spring.
Good day. Happy spring.
Happy